this computer. All right, so Cambodia, welcome to Angkor. So Paul and I got to go to Cambodia in 2012. We were wanted to go in 1996, but the Khmer Rouge had taken over the country, and our friends in Thailand said it is not safe to go to Cambodia. So we did not go. But like I said, we were able to in 2012. So here's Cambodia. Thailand's over here. Vietnam's over here. There's Laos. That's where Tanya lives, someplace up there. And here's Siem Reap. And notice this big lake, Tonle Sap. And then this is the Tonle River. And that played a very important part in the development of Siem Reap. So everybody, and before I went, everybody had heard about Angkor Wat, probably. I had never heard about Angkor Thom. I didn't know much about the Khmer Rouge. I didn't know about the Khmers. I didn't know about any of this stuff. So when we got there, and some of this information I got from the internet, some from guidebooks and stuff like that, but Angkor was an entire city, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It was roughly 77 square miles, about a third, a little less than a third of the size of Dallas. So where we went were these three places: Angkor Wat, some of the Angkor Thom complex, and one other little place called Ta Prohm. And you can see that they were like the Venetians and the Egyptians and the Aztecs and all these other people. They were doing all this channeling of water here, there, and everywhere because you'll see they had a lot of people to support. So one of the things that I like to do is so what was going on and when all this stuff was happening. So here's a quick kind of summary of other things. So everybody knows about the Vikings, my ancestors. It turns out Gonzalez is actually a Danish name. So my ancestors came to North America. Everybody remembers the Battle of Hastings, right? The churches split. The Seljuk Turks started taking over their part of the world. An Egyptian guy went to China and reestablished relationships that had been broken. This was all in 1000 AD time frame. 1100s, the Renaissance starts. The first fire and plague insurance in Iceland. The Englands and the Normans had a treaty, but 5 years later, guess what? England invaded Normandy. The Muslims took over. The Kasbah was built in the 1100s. Kente cloth in Africa was woven. China, there's a Song dynasty. And Tula, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Tula, northwest of Mexico City. That was the end of their empire in the 1100s. Angkor Wat was completed about the same time that the Crusades started. And in the North American continent, all these mounds that they've been finding over the last 10, 20 years, these huge settlements in Missouri, Illinois, the central part, and even over in Georgia. Aztecs are moving around. The Anasazi's moving around. I mean, so there's a lot of other stuff going on while the Khmer was kind of almost at the height of its deal. So we fly to Thailand. I found a hotel, and they could arrange a ride to pick us up at the airport and all some other stuff. And this was like one of the first times I'd ever seen somebody at an airport with my name waiting for me. And it's like, oh, you're talking about me. Oh, okay. So there's a lady, and she took us out to the car. We went to this great place, the Angkor Village. So this is what it looks like from the air. This is Angkor Wat. Our hotel was like about 2 miles south of here. So there's this big moat that goes around it. This is the main part. So at one time, this whole area was flat grass, and over the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, stuff has grown back over all this stuff. And in a second, you'll see that this is where the other complex was. So this, looks pretty big, It is. This is almost a mile long. This pool is about 2 football fields wide, and this is about 4 square miles. And then there's an outer wall along this complex right here, and this is about 200, 300, 400 acres. And this is just one of 300 temples in the Angkor area. And I asked the guy that, and he said, oh yeah, there's about 300. And I said, well, so how many are in Cambodia? And they have found about 4,000 temple sites. So this was a big city, a very big, important city in terms of the Khmer culture. So the Khmers were some people that lived in that area, and a couple of hundred years earlier was when they kind of coalesced into a kingdom. And this king Surya Varman, and Varman means one thing, I forget what it is in Surya another. In 1100s, like a lot of people had power there. I need a temple. They think it took about 30 years to build this thing. And up until his time, most of the temples were dedicated to Shiva or Siva, but he said, no, I really like Vishnu. So he dedicated this temple to Vishnu. Later on, it turned into a Buddhist temple, and then it is one of the longest continuously used Buddhist temples in the world. And remember this picture, there's the wall, the moat, the walls, the inner walls, and the towers. The moat is the ocean beyond. The outer walls are the mountains that are enclosing the world, and these central towers was a representation of the homes of the gods, the Devas, Mount Meru. There are like 5 peaks, so that's what. So there's a lot of symbolism, just like in with the stuff that you see in South America, the stuff you see in China, the stuff you see in Europe. There's a lot of religious symbology built into all this stuff, and you'll see that as we go along. So here's a couple of quotes. So 1586, a Portuguese guy goes over there, and he is totally wowed. A couple of hundred years later, this French guy, Mahut, he thought it was just amazing as well. Most beautiful buildings, grander than anything. And the French, when this guy discovered it when he happened upon it in the 1860s, that kind of started the French colonization efforts in Indochina. But it was, for you'll see it a little bit, for about 300 years, 200-300 years, it went into ruin when the Khmer's went kaput. And then several hundred years later, these people started finding it and going like, wow, this stuff is pretty amazing. 300 buildings, as I talked about, 300 temples. And in this area, there are 1,000 buildings. Like I said, it's not only the longest used, it is also the largest single religious monument complex in the world. Because Angkor, this entire city, had close to, between 3/4 and 1 million people. And the city of Dallas has 1.3. So this was a big, big city. And it was close to that lake, so they had all that fresh water. So it was, whoever was there came up with some good ideas. And then, so like if you've ever seen anything about the Incas or the Aztecs or the Mayans or the people in even, Stonehenge and all that, there were some people that were looking at the skies. And so they were building this place based on the cosmos that they understood and the environment they lived in. This thing is huge. Lots of large sandstone blocks. That's the thing that makes this one a little bit different. There's more stone there than in all the Egyptian pyramids. The Egyptian pyramid stuff came from a 1/4 mile away. That's quite a bit. This stuff got quarried from 25 miles away. So somebody had a lot of power. They said, I need a temple. So then, and you've probably seen shows where people have like done recreations. So this one guy tried to do this 4-foot sculpture. Took him 2 months. And another couple of guys hired a bunch of people, and it took them, over 3 weeks to move 400 tons of stone from that 25 miles away over. So you can imagine this place, 6, 7, 8, 10 million of those things. It's a lot of people, a lot of time. And almost all the other temples were facing east, where the sun rose. But this one faced west, where the sun sets, which is the cosmology of death and Vishnu. It was set up, at certain solstices, just like in a lot of places. The sun came up right at that line. It was Hindu, and the main tower again is aligned with the equinox and the solstices. So somebody was thinking really strongly about building this place. All right, so you get out the car and you start walking across into the outer wall of the complex. And here's Paula right here with our guide. And this, like I said, this is like, a couple hundred feet couple hundred yards across here. So you got to walk just to get to the front door. And at the end of that causeway, if you've ever heard of nagas are serpents. And, you know, look at the size of these people. I mean, they're a little far away. So a person's probably about this tall, maybe. So these things are big. Here's a lion that's had its head cut off. And a lot of cultures, whenever somebody came in, they lopped the heads off of everything to literally decapitate their power. But here are these beautiful, and this is all sandstone. So that's one of the things that made it easy for them to do all this incredible design work. And then once you get in, there's another causeway. And finally, you get to the central complex. And there we are, 9 years ago, looking like tourists. All right, so then our guide took us around this corner and he took us right over to here. And when we were at that corner, you know, we walked up and we saw the main towers and all that. You know, this thing is about 200, at the top is like about 200 or 300 feet tall. And it's a very unique style of architecture. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the pike. But then when you're at that corner, you look down the corner to the left or to the right, these things are a half a mile long. And they're filled with these carvings about all these, the Hindu gods and this king defeating that person and these people doing that. This entire thing is, yeah, I mean, you could spend, like I was saying earlier, you could spend a lifetime deciphering all this stuff. So there are artists and anthropologists and archaeologists that are doing that type of stuff and looking at all this stuff.
They said that is the world's largest continuous bas relief.
Yeah, it is huge. It goes all the way around that inner courtyard. It goes all the way around, down this side, back. I mean, it is big. And again, it's sandstone, so, but still, that's a lot. And so here's our guide. He's describing some of the stuff to us, and this is what it looks like, you know. So there's all this beautiful artwork and all these different people, and you know, it's kind of like the stuff that you see in the Mayans and the Egyptians. I mean, these incredible, you know. So somebody had to come up with all these stories, and somebody said, "Go do that." So it's pretty amazing stuff. And throughout, I'm going to show you a lot of carvings, and you can see the incredible detail here. All right, here's something so there's not only just the bas relief. There's these what are called devatas, which are kind of like gods, and so it's kind of there's some 3D-ness to this as well, and they're almost all smiling unless they're like fighting or something like that. And there's lots of these all over the place. All right, here's some more. This is one of the kings, and he's riding, you know, in his little chariot. Here's all his minions or whatever doing whatever, and here's a bunch of dancers. And in some of the places there are these things called apsaras, and there's like 8,000 apsaras carved into the walls here, there, and everywhere. And look at all these headdresses. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. Here's two different ones. I mean, look at all that depth and detail in there. Let me even, you know, there, some pretty amazing stuff. All right. So then if you go around the right side, you see it from a different angle. So you see this I got off of the internet, but it shows these are things called galleries, and then there's inner walls and stuff like that. So then you can come into it from different places. I think we came in around the backside. And along that wall, there's this Hindu kind of story called the churning of the sea of milk. And it's a story about how the various gods, the devas, the demigods, swirled the thing and swirled the sea of milk and created all this stuff. And there are these asuras all the way down there. And so how many of you been to Chichen Itza? You've been to the main temple of Chichen Itza. There's 4 sides. They got 91 steps on each side, roughly. That's 364, which is just about the size, the number of days in a year. Well, they did the same thing. Somebody was counting and said, hey, you know, they're 92 days from the solstice to the equinox. So somebody's pretty sharp. They know what they're talking about. Then we come around, and so a lot of the stuff is blocked off. In years past, you could climb up into these rooms of the temple, but mostly you just go walking. So you can see how tall this is compared to these people right here. And I was reading something. So one of the reasons that all this stuff is kind of stained or discolored is because there's some sort of a bacteria that messes up the stone, and so it discolors it. So, you know, they haven't corrected that, but still you can just see the immensity of this place. And then when you get inside, there were, because of their water, you know, there was a pool. And so kind of like, you know, what the Muslims did with their washings, and they did at this temple and that temple, they would flood the insides of this thing, where they would either, you know, do baths or do rituals or something or other. They don't have any water right now, but this is what these were. And then I was up here and I took this photograph through the little thingies there, whatever those are called. And here's this guy, and there's monks that go there and people that come and see him. And then fortunately, by the time I came back down, he's still talking to the guy. And now he's saying, oh yeah, that's where that guy was up there taking her pictures. But he was talking to him. And here you can see the pools as well. So they're inside this main temple. There are 4 separate chambers, if you will, with their own pools. So there's one here, there's one back here, and then there's 2 on the other side. So it's incredible. I mean, look at all this work. It's amazing. And there's not just tourists there. When we were leaving, somebody left their fruit out, and the local residents decided to show up as well. So they were having fun. They were glad to see that basket. And so there were some vendors. This was this was inside, but it wasn't like if you go to Teotihuacan or you go to some other places where there's just tons of people. It wasn't too bad. There were a few. The Cambodian tourism have really kind of limited how many and who can get into all these places. So when the French saw this stuff in the 1860s, they were going like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And so in 1931, at the International Colonial Exposition in Paris, they completely recreated that inner temple. This is a life-size thing that they built in Paris. And I found this is a postcard from 1931. So the French were pretty wild with this place. And it was, I mean, it was, so that was actually the last thing we saw, but it was just like, wow. So then the other site is Angkor Thom. So it's a much, much bigger place. And this was kind of the route that we took through the place. And then we went over to another location. So we saw hardly, you know, we saw like 3 or 4 things. We didn't go over here, but I mean, you could spend hours, if not days, if not lifetimes studying all this stuff. It's got an outer wall, and all this is trees. I mean, when you go through this gate, you can't even see any of this stuff because there's so many trees there. And when you come across this little causeway right here, so here's Angkor Wat, here's Angkor Thom, you can see the size difference. Now, where this was less than a mile, this one is 2 miles long, and it's about 3.5 acres. I mean, 3.5 miles. So if you took this, you could plop that in the bottom of Louisville Lake, and there would still be some of Louisville Lake up here. But so this thing is pretty big. Again, 100 years later, Jaya Varman, he decided to build a temple, and they went from the Hindus to the Buddhists. He thought they had just lost a war with somebody, so he thought that the Hindu gods had failed him. So he decided to dedicate this to Buddhist thoughts. And it was, this whole complex was pretty much the last big temple built. And then it became a Hindu, and then it became a Buddhist, and then it became a Hindu, and now it's Buddhist again. And this one's oriented east. It's got the same idea of the moat, the outer walls, and the central towers. So 100 years later, this guy goes, hey, I need a bigger temple. And you'll see it in a little bit, that causeway, they're like soldiers, gods on one side, and there's devil gods on the other side with a nog in the front. And there was some stuff that I was reading that says, oh, this is another churning of the sea. and the churning of the sea is spinning around Banyon, which we're going to see in a minute. So that was like the center of the world, and it was the transition from this world to the next, maybe. Nobody's really sure for sure, but so there, again, a lot of symbology of what's going on with this stuff. So here's the big Naga. He's a little bit different than the lions. Now this lion's got its head on, and the moats on either side here. And then when you look into the middle of it, these are like people, demigods, but then over here, these are kind of like mean looking people. And then what they're holding is a Naga. The Naga goes all the way from the gate to the head of the Naga, and they're like pulling on it. So if you're coming into this, you better be either pretty powerful or very devoting, because these people are protecting the site, just like in a lot of places. And look at how tall this gate is. I mean, you can see the people. So the day that we were there, I think, oh, there we are again. And they're doing a lot of construction. A lot of German companies, a lot of French companies, Japanese companies are going in there and helping the Cambodian government go in there and do stuff. So some of these heads have been recreated and put on, and some of them are like this that are in pretty bad shape. But as you come into this, then guess what? It's traffic time, but that's okay. Everybody was very good about it. All the vendors were outside the gate, but all the tuk-tuks and the buses are going in because they're all going to Banyon. And there's Paula again walking up to the front. And we're going through, we're just about through, and there's even more people on the other side. Some motorcycles. And, like Paula said, there were a lot of Canadians, a lot of Germans, a lot of Japanese, a lot of Chinese. There were a lot of people. This was 2012. So you come in off of the southern gate, and you come into the main temple, pretty good size. And it was, either the Victory Mountain or the Mount Brahma or the World of the Gods, depends on whose definition was. But, so again, somebody knew how to figure out how to do all this stuff. This thing is just covered with all kinds of, again, paintings and carvings of stories here, there, and everywhere. And what you'll see is on each one of those towers, there are all these faces, and it's the king and lots of different interpretations of whether it's the king or something else. Originally, there were 49 or 50 towers. Our guide told us there were 64 because this king had kind of united the Khmers, and to give everybody some skin in this game, gave them a tower. But I couldn't find that in any of the stuff that I was reading. But most of them are still there. And that central tower is over 120 feet tall. And so this is kind of what one of the towers looks like. On all four sides of the tower will be this face, and he's got a smiley face. So they were saying, is it the Buddha? Is it the king? They're not sure. And then all over the place are these little statues, or modern. And this was like the one that the guy tried to recreate, and it took him 2 months to carve, even with sandstone. Here's some more towers. There would be temple rooms down below the tower, and then the faces, and then the heights of the towers. And some of these towers were like, 20 feet tall. Some of them were 60 feet tall, and the middle one was really big. So there's everywhere you look, and lots of carvings. Again, this rooftop collapsed, but this was all an interior room. But now you can see up into the building itself, into the various towers. And so every one of these, somebody's going, okay, go illustrate this story for me. Go illustrate this story for me. There's a whole bunch of faces, more carvings. It's kind of like if you've ever been to the Uffizi Gallery or the Louvre, it just keeps going and going. And so after a while, you just go like, I need a break. But you got to keep going because this place is just amazing. So we went walking through. So here's Paula getting ready to walk through this little area, and that's what's at the end of it. There's, yeah, there he is again. And then I'm standing in the middle of one of the areas. That place.
So then you turn all the way around and you see how many Buddhas are smiling at you.
That video camera.
He's everywhere.
Can you put it on video?
Okay, we go now.
Before I was a good video person, but you get an idea. There you can see the trees in the background.
It's right. It's right.
Oh, nice to you. How's that? What have you got on your hands?
He wants a free ride, that's what it is.
Good job, somebody like.
So and that's just in one little space. You can't get away from them. So here we are next to one. The dancing queen, I guess. I'm not sure what she is. So, you know, you think about how long it took people to build all this stuff as well. And just like in over in Angkor Wat, there's a lot of stuff with heads knocked off. But this one's still got a little bit of its head. There's, you know, you'll see in a little bit, they're not all super pristine or pretty well in good shape. So we did that. That was pretty amazing. Got to walk around that, look at all that stuff. And there's, again, this is a Buddhist temple. So there's some Buddhist sculptures and people are leaving, you know, you can get some incense and stuff like that. So so a lot of the Cambodian people will go to this, even if they're not on vacation. And then you come out of that and you're walking into the center of the complex and there's this thing, this was pretty amazing, the Terrace of the Elephants. And so here's some stairs, there are some elephants all carved in with, and you'll see in a second, there's carvings all down these blocks. And again, you know, it's a story of this king or this battle or these people, and there's all these elephants just as far as you can see. And this wall looks like that and is about that long, probably a football field. So there's elephants all down here, elephants all down here, up against this wall around the corner, and there's a walkway up here because all this is leading to the next area. So that was the main temple, the Buddhist temple. Now we're going to the royal palace area, which is called Femin Anakas, I guess. So, you know, here's another little moat. Here's the causeway, and this was a residence. And so look at the size of these people. So you walk along and then you get to that causeway and there's the building, and here's a close-up of the building, and you can see how small these people are compared to the rest of this building. And so there's all kinds of rooms down in there. We didn't get to go into it. It was, there were just too many people. So it was just like, oh, hi, King, good to see you. But, you know, here was the moat, the causeway, and just everywhere you look, these incredible gardens, lotus flowers, lotus blossoms, you know, people dancing with their outfits. It just goes. And these guys were down here. So, I mean, these things are just amazing. The artwork is just amazing. So then after we did that, we went to this little place over here called Ta Prohm. It's the ancestor of Brahma, and it was dedicated to this guy's mother, and it also became a Buddhist monastery. So this was a temple, this was a temple, this was the royal palace, and now we've got a monastery because there were lots of Buddhist guys around. So, you know, it's very low slung for most part. And again, in the 1400s, when the Khmers got conquered by somebody, all this stuff went into ruin and nature took over. Nature is relentless and it took over. Here's one of the conservation workers. He's taking a break. And these are banyan trees. So when you walk into it, then you see these banyan trees and they're just going like, oh, hey, we're still growing. I don't care about you rocks. There I am. So you can see how big this thing is. And of course, everybody's getting their picture taken just like me. So they built a little stand right there. And it's just like, it's like, you know, an alien being or something, you know, just taking over.
So it's like a symbiotic relationship, isn't it, at Ta Prohm with the trees are supporting the stone, and
Yeah.
and if you take the roots away, the stone will fall. So they're depending on each other now. Right?
Yep. And there's other sites that are like that. But even at this site, at the first two sites, you didn't see it as much. But when we got here, I mean, talk about a jigsaw puzzle. All right. And so I'll show you this picture in a second. But I mean, this was a whole side of a building, and it's all collapsed. And slowly, bit by bit, there goes Paula in to check it out. Bit by bit, they're recreating this stuff, block by block, tower by tower. And here's a couple of the workers. And so this area is a little bit been restored up. So there's a bunch of companies and organizations that are going in there and helping all these people do this stuff. So here's a panorama, so they do have some heavy duty machinery, and they're going to completely rebuild whatever this is. Here's the tree, and here's all those rocks. Anybody want to do a jigsaw puzzle? So, like I said, there weren't very many vendors over in Angkor Wat, and inside Ta Prohm, like I said, the Cambodian Tourism Board has really limited the number of people that can be in there. So there are a few artists and vendors. As we were walking out of this back to our car, we saw these 4 or 5 guys on a platform, and they're musicians. They were Cambodian soldiers who had, lost an arm or a leg or something or other. And the Cambodian government has said, well, we want you to have a lifestyle. So how about you guys learn how to play music? So there are these guys sitting on the side playing music, and they've got CDs for sale. So they really limit the number of people that are, some people are selling a few goods, and then there's a bunch of artists as well. So when we came up to this guy, Paula saw this guy, and if you ever come to our house, this is in our hallway. And here she is giving him $3 US, and he's saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, for some really, really nice watercolor designs. Very nice guy. So, and he's right here in the middle of all this stuff. And more banyan trees taking over. So this is just a different angle of that right there. So if any of you have ever seen Lara Croft Tomb Raider, part of it was filmed in this temple.
Ed, is there any attempt to remove the banyan trees in order to preserve the architecture, or how do the people feel about the banyan trees?
Some of the stuff, and like Jackie said, some of the stuff that I read is they really can't pull it apart, because if they pull it apart, they're going to pull apart the building. So like she said, it's like flying buttresses. If you take the buttress, the wall comes in. So they've just said, hey, this is a nice combination. Here's the main area. There's my honey bunny getting ready to do a jigsaw puzzle.
You have any pictures of us on the elephant?
Oh, wait a second. So we've done all these temples. This is over about, what was it? 8 hours. We went out, we took a break, we went back out. By the end of the day, we were at Angkor Wat, so I'll show it in backgrounds, but it was hot. So the guide was really good. The driver, every time we got back to the car, he had a bottle of cold water for us. So after we did all that, we decided to go on the elephants, because that's the thing you do in Cambodia. So there we are up on the elephants, and there's all these guys, and the hotel works with one of the groups that helps take care of the elephants. So they were able to book us a ride on the elephant. So here's how you drive it. Put your little feet, you push one ear, you push the other ear, and then we get up on the top. And then what you do is you go right around Banyon, that main temple in Angkor Thom. And, it's traffic jam at the temple, but, there's some other people. So you can see how many people are back over here. It's pretty busy, but, if you've ever ridden an elephant, it just takes a little while. So it was nice. You get to see the world from a little bit higher than if you were just walking around.
And
so
Edward rode the elephant, and I got on, took a picture, and said, I want off.
So it was pretty interesting. So
He asked what time of year were we there?
so this was in February, like late February of 2012. This is on that causeway into Angkor Thom, and here's the moat, and here's one of the devas guarding the temple. And so this is late afternoon that we were up there, I think, or maybe it was morning, I can't remember. No, this is afternoon, because I went back up there. I had the guy take me back up in the afternoon because I wanted to see some of this stuff. So I got to see that.
You know how it is in Southeast Asia. They have 2 seasons, hot and wet, hotter and wetter.
And this was a hot and wet season. And then if you go to the other side of the bridge, oh no, this is from Angkor Thom, Angkor Wat rather, one of the inner courtyards of Angkor Thom, because we were there in the afternoon, the sun is going down. So you get these really red sunsets. And the Cambodian flag is one of a few flags in the entire world where they have a building in the flag. So this is a recreation of Angkor Wat on the Cambodian flag. And it's varied over the years, but that has stayed pretty consistent. So that is my view of Cambodia. What time?
Thank you, Edward. That was very good.
Is that the only time, Paula, that you were referred to as Mrs. Edward Perez, greeted at the airport?
I noticed
Muted.
that.
She's muted.
Oh, now you all can tell her that she's muted.
Maris.
All of us are muted.
Paula, you're muted.
You're muted, Paula.
They only greeted Edward. They didn't greet me.
What said Mr. and Mrs.?
Oh, it did?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's why it was so
Yeah,
funny,
they
because
did.
like you would ever go around saying, I'm Mrs. Edward Perez.
No,
It
I
was-
wasn't Mrs. at that time either. So
That's funny.
Yeah, I
And
know.
see, I'm on grandma duty.
One of the things that I thought was very interesting about it, you saw all the moats, and then Edward mentioned the lake that was there. It's really built over a swamp, so it's amazing that those structures have survived for 1,000 years. But the Khmer were excellent hydraulic engineers, and people are still going there to study the engineering and how it was built and how it has remained there. And when you go into the main gate, you have to stop and get your ticket. There was a special place for engineering students and engineers to enter.
Oh,
hmm
interesting.
They got a lower rate than we did to go in to study it.
Yeah, very interesting.
I loved all the information that you put up, Edward.
Mhm.
Kudos. Really enjoyed that.
Some of that I learned from our guide. Our guide was really good. And he wasn't like dragging us and running us and stuff like that. He would sit there and he would talk with us. And then every once in a while we'd just say, too much, hold on just a minute. But it wasn't because he was incessant. It was just because, you could see from those pictures, there's just a lot of stuff. So some of the stuff I had read about and got some more information, especially the timelines and the sizes and stuff like that. Oh, and so Layla's been there too.
2015. Aha.
Yeah.
So what's your impression of it?
I don't remember much, Edward. We had a 1 month whole Asia trip. All those countries, 5 countries. I loved it. Yeah, I was there in October, end of October.
Yeah, because a lot of us have been to various parts of Europe and South America. And, I know some of you all have been to China and stuff, but this is to me, this is a very different type of culture and the immensity. It's like Teotihuacan in Mexico is huge. Well, this place was huge as well. So
when we were there, the vendors weren't inside. There was a special place for the vendors, and they weren't inside the temples anymore like they were when you were there.
Well, there were just a few. Most of them, so that the gate,
the musicians were at Ta Prohm.
There were a bunch.
Yeah, but that I remember musicians there, but the others, we saw the vendors in a special area.
Yeah.
And were not going into the temples like in your photographs.
Yeah.
There were only a few inside, and there were quite a few more outside. And our guide, none of the vendors approached us. The guide kept the vendors away from us unless there was something specifically we wanted. Like I collect drums from everywhere, and I wanted to buy a drum. So I did, and then I wanted to buy those scarves, the most beautiful silk scarves, you know, with the pictures of the elephants and Angkor Wat and all that woven into the silk scarves. I didn't even bargain. They wanted $3 for like a 4 foot by 2 foot scarf, silk scarf.
Well, poverty is so rampant there.
Yeah.
We went into Phnom Penh, and then we drove to Siem Reap. And so we went through a number of little towns, and seeing the way the people lived along the way, it was so disheartening. We did see electric lines that were running along the highway, and so the houses right on the highway had electricity. If you weren't right on the highway, you had no power. You had nothing. And we saw at a construction site building a new hotel, there were 2 men out getting water, and they had one of those water pumps where they had steps on it, and they stepped up and down to get the water to come up out of the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, that was how primitive and how poor the country is. It was just, I mean, it was very disheartening to see that level of poverty.
Well, in 2002, we took a boat ride on the tunnel top on the lake, and saw all the boats and the people living on the boats on the lake.
Yeah, they have everything. They have a post office, they have a drugstore, they have artisan
schools,
shops, and everything, right, on that lake, on the boats. I have a question for you, Edward. In the 90s, when they said they were recovering from Khmer Rouge, I didn't know that because it went on for 3 years. Pol Pot was operating in the 70s after we pulled out in 75 from Vietnam, and it was kind of like 75, 6, 7, 8. And the reason that the intense migration to locate people out of the cities like Phnom Penh and into the agrarian culture, that was stopped by Vietnam, and they installed a puppet government in like 77, 8. So I was surprised that they said that to you about the 90s, that they were still recovering. They weren't catering to tourism then, but it wasn't necessarily because of Khmer Rouge. That was already a
it wasn't Khmer Rouge, Edward. It was what had happened. Our friends in Thailand were telling us about it. An American woman from some university had been killed about 6 months before we got to Thailand. And so it was still dangerous, but it wasn't, it was, we don't know who, but there was still danger there. And when people are in the very next country who are in the know say it's not real safe to go there, we didn't go. So we waited until we went back in 2012.
Oh yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And so during the time that the Khmer Rouge took over, there was not very much reconstruction and conservation projects going on there. It wasn't until they lost and got kicked out and the new government came in. And like I said, there were a lot of different big billboards, you know, so-and-so, you know, the UN is kind of like over UNESCO, I guess it is, because it's a World Heritage Site. So they're kind of like the overarcher, and then I guess they like contract with various companies in various countries to come in there and restore the walls or restore the causeways, et cetera, et cetera. So
Pol Pot was still very fresh in their minds. When we were in Phnom Penh, we went to one of the killing fields, and I have to admit I was really reluctant to go. After we went there, it was quite an emotional experience to go there and see it. And then we also went to the high school in the city that had been turned into a prison. They were excellent record keepers. They kept a record, a photograph, and information about every single prisoner that they captured and executed in that prison. Anybody that came into their prison, their biography was there, and there's all these photographs on the wall. It's very difficult to go there also.
It was, and I think that they tried to match an entry photo with a death photo. Yeah. And they learned a few things about record keeping from the Nazis. And they were very careful about that.
They were very careful with their records, yes.
And the thousands of people that went through that prison, I think there were 12 survivors.
Yeah, there were very few. There was one child that was there that survived, and then a few other people, but not many. Most of them, once you went in there, you didn't get out.
Did you see the place where they had all the skulls? Yes. And they arranged it by, you know, these are male youths, 12 to 14 years old. There's God.
Yeah, it's a building, it's a tower, and they had all the skulls in it. And you walk around the grounds, and they ask you, please stay on paths. Don't walk on the bones. You can't help it. There are bones everywhere, even in the middle of the paths. Oh, it was very, very disturbing to go there.
So, you know, which is a continuation of you know, what rulers have been doing for thousands of years, you know. And so even 1,000 years ago, when the Khmers were fighting the Burmese, that were fighting the Thais, that were fighting you know, all this stuff has been going on for years. So it's the sad part is it's still continuing, but you know, in places it gets better and better. So
well, our Thai friends took us out to Uttaya, and when the Cambodians had taken over Thailand,
or the Burmese, one of the two.
The Burmese, when they did the same thing. They cut the heads off of all their Buddhas and burned their temple complex out there. So, but that's where what I think we probably ought to do now if we have a conflict. One king fought another king on an elephant, and that's how they decided who would win, rather than a whole army.
So, any other questions? Kathy, you got a question? You're muted. Kathy Ignatin.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I'm just wondering who we should put on elephants today.
Let's not go there. I think we would have.
No. Edward, thank you so much. It was a wonderful program.
Did a good job.
Thank you.
Hope that was of interest to you, Vincent and Jennifer. Hope you enjoyed it. So have you ever been over there, Vincent or Jennifer? Have you ever been to that part of the world? Nope. Okay.
So we will see you all in December. Our Thursday.
Is it bumpy to ride an elephant?
No, it's just kind of like you're going like this, because they're moving slow. You know, they're not like a horse. It's not. It's just, you know, it's just kind of ambling along.
And I was sitting with my leg like kind of behind me, and the swaying, I kept getting a cramp in my leg. So that's why I said I want off. They said,
even when you're riding a horse, you have to get with the rhythm of the horse. You have to get with the rhythm of the elephant.
Yeah. I was on a tour one time with a couple from California, and they had been on a 3-day trip with elephants. And she said every time they went across water, the elephants would drink the water, and then they would spray their back with the water. and we had on the filthiest clothes in 3 days that you can imagine.
I was curious what the purpose of the moats were. They didn't look like they were a barrier to invasion or anything.
Somewhat, but like Mary was saying, they were. You know, and the Spanish were doing, the natives were doing down in South Texas. They're channeling water because this was a big city and they needed water for their people and they needed water for their crops. So they're channeling water, and they needed it also for ritual purposes. And they were going to be lugging water 12, 15 miles So they built all these channels and stuff to get, you know, that maybe.
And it was a huge agricultural complex too. They were raising so much food there.
Yeah.
And because they had this vast irrigation systems, and they were clearing the land, and then they could provide water as they needed it.
Didn't you say they had nearly 1 million people?
Yeah, 750,000 plus.
Yeah.
It's a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And
So
but
the square moats there around the main complex would have been just the people, because it didn't look like it channeled out of
those moats also. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand this. But again, it gets back to hydraulics, and it all is in the way they manage the water has kept those temples more or less intact. So they're very well preserved, considering they're 1,000 years old. And it has to do with the hydraulics and the way they manage the water.
And that's probably why the engineers are still coming there.
Yes, and that's why they're still studying it, because they're great hydraulic engineers 1,000 years ago.
Wow. Was at the beginning.
And then we didn't do it, but one of the things you could do in the late evening is someplace over here. There was a place that had hot air balloons, and if you want, you could take a hot air balloon and see the complex. Maybe not this tall, but this high, but you could see it from above.
Mm. Okay, thank you very much, Edward. I think I'm
See you
gonna leave.
Thursday.
Yep. See you Thursday. Lizette Cafe, Hillcrest and Frankfurt. Is that what I said?
Frankfurt, yes.
Hillcrest and Frankfurt. It's right on the northwest corner. I think there's a police station on one side, the Lizette on the other side. I'll be there.
I'll be there.
I'll be there.
All right.
Three.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.